The stench of wet concrete still clung to the air when the first cracks appeared. A low, sucking sound, like the earth groaning under too much weight, echoed through Pine Hollow. Water that once ran clear through a mountain-fed creek now sat trapped, stagnating into a swamp. And at the center of it all, a gleaming row of million-dollar homes, sinking inch by inch into the muck. What happens when a homeowners association tampers with nature itself and awakens something they cannot control? Pine Hollow wasn't always this way. Nestled in the foothills of Colorado, it was once a sanctuary, a winding creek cutting through old-growth trees, children catching fireflies, widows tending roses by water's edge. A place where property values mattered less than community. But when the new HOA took over, everything changed. Led by their polished, power-drunk president, Leonard Cray, the board turned neighbors into subjects and nature into profit margins. They called it beautification. In truth, it was domination. The creek had always been the neighborhood's heartbeat. A ribbon of cold, mountain-fed water running past every home, nourishing gardens and cooling summer evenings. But to Cray, it was a nuisance. He wanted uniform lawns, sculpted landscapes, and HOA-approved walking trails. The creek didn't fit his vision. Too wild, too free, too unpredictable. So, in secret weekend operations, under the guise of erosion control, the board poured truckloads of concrete into the running water. At first, residents thought it was routine maintenance. Until the flow stopped. Until the cattails withered. Until the stench of rot replaced the sweet scent of wildflowers. The HOA hadn't just tampered with a stream. They'd strangled a living artery. And soon, nature would take its revenge. But the first to notice wasn't the HOA. It was the widow who lived at the bend of the creek, the one they thought too broken to fight BAC. Eleanor "Ellie" Granger was no stranger to loss. 2 years before the concrete trucks arrived, she'd buried her husband of 31 years, a quiet schoolteacher who had loved that creek like it was family. Together they'd built a sanctuary on its banks, planting willows for shade and scattering ashes in the waters that carried memories downstream. Now, alone in her 1940s Craftsman, Ellie walked each morning with coffee in hand, listening to what remained of the water's whisper. That creek wasn't just property. It was sacred. When the HOA sealed it, Ellie noticed first. The silence was deafening. The soft trickle replaced by a stagnant pool that buzzed with mosquitoes. Fish floated belly up, starved of oxygen. The air soured, carrying a swamp's suffocating heaviness. Neighbors complained of damp basements, mold creeping up drywall, foundations cracking under swelling soil. But Leonard Cray dismissed every concern. Temporary runoff, he said, waving papers stamped with false permits and fabricated engineering reports. He wasn't fixing nature. He was burying evidence. What Cray didn't count on was Ellie's resolve. Because behind her grief was steel. She wasn't just a widow. She was a retired environmental attorney. And she knew exactly where to strike. The HOA had silenced the creek. But Ellie was about to give it a voice louder than any gavel. The transformation was rapid. Within months, Pine Hollow's jewel had turned into a swamp. Yards once manicured for garden parties now squelched underfoot. The once pristine walking paths reeked of sulfur. Then came the flooding. Heavy spring rains had nowhere to flow. Water pressed against basement walls, seeping through foundations. Insurance claims soared. Mold remediation vans became as common as mail trucks. Ellie watched from her porch as moving vans rolled out one by one. Elderly residents forced to abandon lifelong homes. Young families fleeing suffocating debt from repairs insurance refused to cover. But Leonard Cray stood smug. He doubled HOA fees under the guise of water management and funneled emergency funds into his private contracting company, the same firm that had poured the concrete. Every dollar stolen, every document forged, every neighbor silenced. Ellie began her quiet war. Armed with decades of legal training, she filed open records requests, photographing every crack in sidewalks, every sump pump working overtime. She mapped the water's spread like a surgeon studying disease. She dug into property filings, discovering Cray's paper trail of corruption. But her most damning evidence came from nature itself. The water had found new paths. Underground, unseen, it tunneled beneath the million-dollar McMansions perched arrogantly above the creek bed. Hairline fractures split driveways. Retaining walls bulged like swollen veins. One home leaned just enough that blinds no longer hung straight. Ellie's discovery wasn't just legal ammunition. It was geological inevitability. And as she compiled evidence, she asked herself a chilling question. How long before the swamp claimed its first house? The first collapse came on a stormy night in June. Neighbors woke to a sound like thunder, followed by a scream swallowed by the rain. A home on Ridgeview Lane, valued at $1.3 million, had tilted into the swamp, its foundation crumbling as water gushed from beneath like a ruptured artery. The HOA called it an isolated incident. Cray dismissed blame, blaming unseasonably high rainfall. But Ellie's files told a different story. She had photographs of concrete pours, invoices from Cray's own company, and time-stamped drone footage proving the creek had been deliberately buried. Ellie leaked the evidence. First to Channel 7 Investigates, then to the state attorney general. Within days, headlines screamed, HOA greed drowns million-dollar homes. The floodgates opened. Families filed lawsuits. Insurance companies, armed with Ellie's documentation, denied claims against man-made interference. Banks froze HOA accounts. Federal inspectors swarmed Pine Hollow, probing every inch of mud and concrete. As pressure mounted, Cray lashed out. He mailed cease and desist letters, claiming defamation. He tried to smear Ellie as an unstable widow. But neighbors knew the truth. She had warned them. She had fought for them. And now, she was their shield. Meanwhile, the swamp grew. Mosquitoes carried West Nile. Children developed rashes. Property values nosedived. What had been Colorado's most desirable subdivision became a cautionary tale whispered across real estate forums. And then came the cruelest twist. The very homes Cray had bragged about, his crown jewel development, began sinking. Nature had turned his arrogance into a swampy graveyard of concrete and greed. It was late August when the swamp finally claimed Leonard Cray's own estate. Neighbors gathered on porches as cracks spidered up his stucco walls. The ground moaned, wet earth shifting beneath his custom wine cellar. With a sound like tearing metal, the foundation buckled. A corner of the mansion sank into black water, windows shattering as alarms wailed into the night. The irony was cinematic. The very man who had strangled the creek now watched his empire drown in the rot he created. Federal marshals arrived before dawn, armed with indictments for fraud, embezzlement, and environmental destruction. Cray was let out in handcuffs, his designer shoes splattered with swamp mud. The same neighbors he'd fined for bird feeders and flower beds stood silently, watching justice swallow him whole. Ellie, standing at the bend of the creek, felt no triumph, only solemn closure. The water was ruined, but the truth was undeniable. Pine Hollow wasn't destroyed by weather. It was destroyed by arrogance. And in the end, the creek had delivered its own verdict. Pine Hollow would never be the same. Dozens of families lost homes. Millions in property value vanished into the swamp. But from ruin came reform. The state passed new HOA oversight laws, requiring independent environmental studies for all beautification projects. Insurance companies tightened restrictions, protecting homeowners from fraudulent boards. And Ellie's evidence became the foundation for landmark civil suits that redistributed seized funds to displaced families. Most haunting of all, the swamp remained, a permanent scar across the neighborhood. Once a sanctuary, now a reminder. Crooked fence posts and half-submerged mailboxes jutted from the water like gravestones. Nature's way of marking where greed had drowned. Ellie rebuilt, not her house, but her purpose. She founded the Granger Creek Foundation, teaching communities how to fight HOA corruption, how to document, how to stand united. At the ribbon cutting, she said words that carried like a warning. Water remembers. And so do we. The story of Pine Hollow spread nationwide. Realtors whispered it as a caution. Legislators cited it in hearings. And homeowners, thousands of them, found courage in Ellie's fight. Because if one widow with nothing left to lose could take down an empire of greed, then perhaps no HOA tyrant was untouchable. Have you ever watched an HOA destroy something sacred? Share your story in the comments. It might save someone else's home. And if you want more stories where justice rises from the swamp, subscribe so you don't miss the next reckoning.